Grace Emmy Rose Millane was born in Essex, England in 1996. Her parents David and Gillian raised her alongside her two older brothers, Michael and Declan. She was the youngest of 3 siblings. Grace was known for being sociable, lively, and family-oriented. She loved all things creative and artistic. Grace attended the University of Lincoln and graduated with a degree in advertising and marketing. She was excited to embark on a new adventure before starting the next chapter of her life. She had spent a year saving money for a backpacking tour after graduation, a journey that would last a full year. Those who knew Grace described her as compassionate and caring. Before leaving for her trip, she demonstrated this kindness in a meaningful way. She cut off her long hair and donated it to the Little Princess Trust, a charity that makes wigs for children battling cancer. In October 2018, Grace left her family home and set off on her travels. The adventurous and outgoing graduate first traveled to Peru before spending 6 weeks exploring South America. She met other travelers along the way and was enthusiastic about sharing her journey with everyone back home through messages and photographs. On November 19th, 21-year-old Grace arrived in New Zealand alone. 11 days later, she reached Auckland. She checked into a hostel called the Base Backpackers on Queen Street, where she shared a room with other travelers. On Saturday evening, December 1st, 2018, Grace left the hostel just before 6 p.m. and headed into the city center. She wore a knee-length black dress, white shoes, and carried a small handbag. She had made plans to meet someone she had matched with on Tinder, a popular dating app. Initially, Grace seemed uncertain about meeting this person, but after talking more, she and her date eventually made plans to get drinks together. Grace met her date at Sky City, an entertainment complex with bars, restaurants, and a casino. She had been sending messages to her friend Amina back home, telling her how well she was clicking with this man. She mentioned that he was an oil manager who lived in a hotel. By all accounts, the evening appeared to be going well. About an hour later, they visited a place called the Blue Stone Room. At one point during the evening, Grace got up from the table. The mystery man, for reasons unknown, picked up her handbag and started searching through it. But just after 9:30 p.m., they both left the bar arm in arm and headed down the street together. The next day was Sunday, December 2nd, Grace's 22nd birthday. Her family and friends at home began sending messages and reaching out to her over social media, but Grace unusually wasn't responding to anyone. Her 2 phones were going straight to voicemail. Her brother Declan noted that she had been constantly sending them details and pictures of her trip so far. Not receiving any response from her on her birthday was immediately alarming. Grace was a homebody at heart, someone who stayed connected with her family. This silence was a major red flag. Her parents contacted the Auckland police and reported her as missing on December 5th. Police reached out to the hostel where Grace was staying, and staff confirmed that she had not checked back in on the night of December 1st. Initially, the police didn't suspect any criminal activity. The majority of Grace's belongings were still at her hostel. Perhaps she had just stayed with some new friends and forgotten to contact people. However, for detectives, it didn't take long to track down where Grace had been on that Saturday evening. The city had vast amounts of CCTV cameras. The mystery man she was spotted with that night was quickly identified. On the very night Grace was last seen, she had changed her profile picture on Facebook. A comment was posted underneath the picture saying she looked beautiful and very radiant. The person who commented was the same Tinder date seen drinking with Grace. This man was Jesse Kempson, who was currently living at the City Life Hotel in Auckland. Jesse had written a post before making those comments, and it caught investigators' attention. Parts of the post said he was sorry for his mistakes, his arrogance, and his selfishness. But who was Jesse Kempson? The 26-year-old was born in Wellington and had moved several times as a child after his parents split up. He had been partially raised by his grandparents and was virtually estranged from much of his family. Everyone who knew Jesse described him as a pathological liar. He claimed everything from being the cousin of a famous All Blacks rugby player to telling people he was dying of cancer. He lied to employers, landlords, romantic partners, and his family and friends. Time and again, Jesse's fake world caught up with him. He was frequently evicted from his apartments and lost jobs because of his constant lying. A former landlord shared one example of Jesse's deception. He had claimed to be a professional softball player who had been signed up by New Zealand's national softball team, the Black Sox. He would lie and say he was waiting on contract money. But after 8 weeks of excuses, the landlord contacted the Black Sox management. Once again, Jesse's lies were exposed. He told his landlord at the City Life Hotel that he was a top manager for Woolworths, a large retail company. In reality, his rent was being paid by state benefits, government assistance. Jesse's last job was in telephone sales. This also ended in dismissal because of his lies. And all of this happened on the very day he met Grace Millane, December 1st. Jesse was the last known person seen with Grace that night, and police knew he was the man they needed to help fill in the missing pieces. On the same day Grace was reported missing, December 5th, Jesse was asked to come into the police station to answer some routine questions. Officers asked him to tell them about Grace. Jesse explained that he had been talking to Grace on Tinder. They had matched on Friday. He saw that they had matched the next day on Saturday. Then they met at Sky City and decided to go up to Andy's Burger Bar, which was on the first floor. When asked whose idea it was to go to that particular burger place, Jesse said it was his because he didn't initially know if she was real. Officers asked what he meant by that. Jesse explained that he had heard of something called catfishing, where someone uses your profile or photos and pretends to be you, then meets you as a completely different person. When officers asked how meeting in a public place would protect him from meeting someone who wasn't as attractive as their photo suggested, Jesse said there was security there. In his mind, if she wasn't who she said she was, at least he would feel safe. Officers showed Jesse CCTV footage of him and Grace that night. He pointed out where Grace was going one way and he was going across the street. He explained that he went down Queen Street. Actually, he corrected himself. He went down Victoria Street straight to the bottom, then turned left and headed toward the viaduct. Officers noted that he had walked in a somewhat unusual direction if he was planning to go to the viaduct. When asked if there was a particular reason for that route, Jesse simply said he felt safer going that way. Officers explained they were very concerned for Grace's safety. They said it was entirely possible that she had been the victim of foul play. They asked if he understood what that meant. He said yes. They asked what his feelings would be about providing a voluntary DNA sample so they could compare it against something if needed. Jesse said he would be 100% willing to do that. He stated that he knew he hadn't done anything wrong, so he was happy to provide the sample. Officers explained that at this stage, they didn't know what had happened to Grace. It was possible that somebody had killed her. They asked if he understood that. He said yes. They clarified that when they said foul play, they meant someone might have murdered her. They acknowledged that they didn't know if she had been murdered or not yet. She might be alive and well, but she might also be dead. Jesse seemed to process this information, then suddenly asked if he was being arrested for something he didn't do. Officers clarified that he had not been arrested. Jesse maintained that nothing out of the ordinary had happened that night. The date had ended nicely with a hug, a kiss on the cheek, and plans for the following day before the pair eventually parted ways at around 10 p.m. He said he had tried to message her the next day on Tinder, but noticed that Grace had unmatched him. That was where his encounters with her abruptly ended. But the officers hadn't yet finished looking through the CCTV footage from the City Life Hotel, and they were about to start gaining more answers to the remaining questions they had. A sinister and disturbing picture was slowly being put together. Almost 6 terabytes of CCTV data were being carefully analyzed. Despite Jesse saying they parted ways on the street, the footage showed something completely different. Both Grace and Jesse were seen arriving at the City Life Hotel arm in arm. They exited the elevator together on Jesse's floor. But Grace was never seen leaving the building.
If you're enjoying this story, kindly do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. It is free and won't cost anything, but it means the world to us. We're just a small channel trying to grow. Thank you, and back to the video.
The morning after, which would have been Grace's birthday, cameras picked up Jesse leaving the hotel. Investigators followed his movements over the coming hours, tracking his every action. He left the hotel in the morning and went shopping to buy a suitcase. He then went to buy some cleaning supplies. Just before noon, he took a taxi to a car rental company and rented a red Toyota Corolla. Several hours later, Jesse met with another woman he had engaged with on Tinder. She later reported to police that he had some disturbing conversations with her. He spoke about burying bodies and claimed to have friends who were police officers. His date said he made her feel so uneasy that she declined Jesse's offer to get in his car and made her own way home. She never talked to him again. After this meeting, Jesse went out into the city center again. This time he went to hire a carpet cleaning machine called a rug doctor. He explained to staff that he had some red wine stains that needed cleaning up. Later that evening, at 9:30 p.m., Jesse loaded 2 suitcases onto a hotel trolley and moved them into the Toyota he had rented earlier. At around 7 a.m. the next day, cameras captured him again, this time buying a shovel. 2 hours later, he was spotted power washing the car. He then returned the car to the rental company, and it was subsequently rented out by someone else. On December 5th, the day Grace was reported missing, Jesse was seen visiting various locations around the city and dumping things in trash bins. Police arrived at the City Life Hotel looking to talk to Jesse. Just as they reached the front desk, Jesse returned to the hotel himself. The minute he saw the police, he quickly turned around and began walking away with his head firmly facing the opposite direction. The police noticed him, chased after him, and brought him in for questioning. Despite Jesse denying that anything had happened, police still began a thorough search of his hotel room. That evening, a public appeal was made for missing British backpacker Grace Millane. Police held a press conference to appeal for sightings of the 22-year-old, who had not been seen since 7:15 p.m. on Saturday night. On December 7th, Grace's father David was now in Auckland. He made an emotional plea for help. He introduced himself as Grace's dad and thanked everyone for coming. He explained that Grace had been missing for several days. They last had contact with her on Saturday, December 1st, and as a family, they were extremely concerned for her welfare. David described Grace as a lovely, outgoing, fun-loving, family-oriented daughter. He emphasized that Grace had never been out of contact for this amount of time. She was usually in daily contact with either her mother, himself, her 2 brothers, or other family members on social media. He noted that she had arrived in New Zealand on November 20th and had been bombarding them with numerous photographs and messages about her adventures. David said they were all extremely upset, and it was very difficult at that time to fully describe the range of emotions they were going through. The investigation was moving quickly. Although police didn't name him publicly, they revealed they had spoken to Jesse and that he was a person of interest. The more time passed, the more fearful people became. Police stated that they had grave concerns for Grace's safety. On December 8th, as more and more evidence came to light, Jesse was eventually taken into custody and interviewed again. This time, his story had drastically changed. Officers confirmed that he was willing to speak to them about the events of last Saturday. Jesse said yes, he was willing to talk. They asked him to tell them what happened. Jesse explained that Grace had started talking to him about 50 Shades of Grey, a book and movie series known for depicting bondage and rough sex. They started having sex. At first, it was just normal, he claimed. Then she asked if they could get into bondage and have more violent sex. They ended up on the floor. Then she told him to hold her throat. He said he went into the shower afterward, and all he remembered was falling asleep in the shower. At this point, Jesse said he needed to stop. He said he needed to go. Jesse claimed that when he woke up the next morning and realized Grace was dead, he went into shock. He panicked and put her body in a suitcase and drove out to bury her. He still denied any guilt, insisting he didn't know what to do and was confused and all over the place. Officers pressed him on the details. They noted that he came out of the shower, the lights had been on in the shower, he put a towel around himself, turned the light off, then returned to his bed and went to sleep. At that point, when he exited the shower, they asked if he didn't look around but just assumed from the silence that Grace had left. Jesse said yes, he thought she had gone. He thought she had left. Officers told him they were going to leave very soon and that he was going to take them to where he buried her. Jesse agreed. They explained that Grace would likely be exhumed the next day at some point. After that, a pathologist, a specialist doctor, would perform a post-mortem examination. They told him these doctors were very skilled at establishing people's causes of death. They asked if he understood that. He said yes. Then they asked him directly, "Did you kill Grace Millane?" Following this, officers formally arrested Jesse Kempson for the murder of Grace Millane. The forensic search of Jesse's hotel room added more to the already disturbing story. Despite Jesse's attempts to clean up, Grace's blood covered the floor of the hotel room. Given what Jesse had told them, it didn't take long for police to start searching an area on Scenic Drive near the Waitakere Reservoir. Shortly after 4 p.m. that day, officers found a body around 10 yards from the road. Police announced that the area had been identified late the previous night as a location of interest as a result of their investigative work. They could now confirm that a short time ago, they had located a body which they believed to be Grace. The formal identification process would now take place. However, based on the evidence they had gathered over the past few days, they expected that this was Grace. The focus now was to piece together exactly what had happened to a young woman who came to New Zealand on her overseas experience. The announcement brought the search for Grace to an end. It was an unbearable time for the Millane family, and everyone's hearts went out to them. Detective Inspector Scott Beard had been heading the investigation and was working closely with the Millane family. He acknowledged that any father, any parent in this situation would struggle. He mentioned that he himself had a daughter in her 20s, so he understood the pain. They were putting a lot of support around David. It was difficult because he was there with a brother from England while the rest of the family remained back home. For D.I. Beard and his team, who had been hoping to find Grace safe and well and bring good news to the family, it was clear how much of a painful moment this was for everyone involved in the search. The grief was shared throughout the nation. Thousands of people paid tribute to Grace and held vigils. New Zealand's Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, publicly apologized to Grace's parents and offered hers and her country's full support. She said she could not imagine the grief of Grace's family and what they were experiencing and feeling. Her thoughts and prayers were with Grace's father David, who was in the country, with her mother Gillian, who could not be there, and with her wider family, friends, and loved ones. On behalf of New Zealand, Prime Minister Ardern wanted to apologize to Grace's family. She stated that their daughter should have been safe in New Zealand, but she wasn't, and the country was sorry for that. She advised the family through the police that if there was anything they could do to assist, they were there to help. Following this, Jesse Kempson was formally charged with the murder of Grace Millane. On December 10th, just 5 days after Grace was reported missing, Jesse appeared in court in Auckland. He was granted an interim name suppression to ensure a fair trial. This is why so much of his interview footage was blurred out for a long time. Following an autopsy, a pathologist confirmed that Grace had been strangled. She had bruises on her arms and chest, consistent with being pinned down. Considerable force would have been required, and the pressure on her neck must have lasted between 4 and 5 minutes to be enough to kill her. At around 1:30 a.m. on Sunday morning, as Grace lay dead in his room, Jesse carried out a number of internet searches. Using his phone, he looked up terms like hottest fire, flesh-eating birds, and Waitakere Ranges, the location where he would later try to bury Grace's body. After this, he browsed through a pornography website. He then took several intimate photographs of Grace's dead body. Just over a month after Grace was found, hundreds of people turned out for her funeral at Brentwood Cathedral in Essex. Detective Inspector Scott Beard, who had been looking after the case, flew to England to pay his respects and support the Millane family. 6 days after Grace was laid to rest, Jesse appeared in the High Court and pleaded not guilty. Jesse's trial began in November later that year. The trial would last just 3 weeks. For much of it, Jesse remained stone-faced, showing no emotion. He occasionally glanced down at court papers or held his head in his hands. Jesse's defense team argued that although tragic, Grace's death was caused by nothing more than consensual rough sex that had gone horribly wrong. They claimed that Grace had engaged in sexual encounters like this before meeting Jesse. This time, it had been a tragic case of sexual misadventure. They said that Jesse had simply panicked and attempted to hide Grace's body after he realized the sexual encounter had accidentally taken her life. The defense stated that this was not a murder. Nothing had changed in their position. It was an accidental death that took place in the context of sexual activities that, if done incorrectly by inexperienced or intoxicated people, could go wrong. But the prosecution was armed with a mountain of strong evidence and witnesses. They argued that Jesse did not panic and this was not simply something that went wrong. It was very clearly deliberate and intentional. They said he had calmly and callously set about covering his tracks, creating what they called a labyrinth of storytelling and lies as he went. The prosecution emphasized that to have killed Grace Millane, the defendant had to have had her under his grip, suffocating her. Strangling her was probably the correct term, for a total of 5 to 10 minutes. At some point during this time, she lost consciousness and would have become unconscious, limp, and lifeless under his hand. And he had to carry on. If that wasn't reckless murder in this country, they argued somebody would have to explain what was. After just 5 hours of deliberations, on December 22, 2019, the jury delivered their verdict. They found Jesse Shane Kempson guilty of the murder of Grace Millane. Jesse was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum non-parole period of 17 years. The judge noted that Jesse was a large and powerful man while Grace was diminutive, small in stature. In those circumstances, Grace was particularly vulnerable. Jesse was in a position of total physical dominance over her. Grace's mother spoke about the daily torment she experienced thinking about what Jesse had done to her daughter. She thought about the terror and pain Grace must have experienced at his hands. As a mother, she said she would have done anything to change places with her daughter. She sat full of guilt knowing she couldn't help her, that she should have been there. Grace died terrified and alone in a room with him. Grace's father David spoke as well. He said the verdict of murder would be welcomed by every member of the Millane family and Grace's friends. However, it would not reduce the pain and suffering they had endured over the past year. Grace was taken away from them in the most brutal fashion a year ago, and their lives and family had been ripped apart. This would be with them for the rest of their lives. The family thanked several people. They acknowledged that the Auckland police force had been professional, diligent, and thorough throughout the investigation. Last but not least, they wanted to thank the people of New Zealand. The nation had opened their hearts to Grace and her family. The Milanes could not express their gratitude enough for all the offers and gifts of kindness they had received over the past year. Detective Inspector Beard reflected on the case. He said he always thought that if it wasn't Grace, it was going to be someone else. He noted that while he wasn't a psychologist and couldn't discuss psychological profiles, what they did know was that Jesse was a liar. Numerous times they proved he lied to the police. He lied to others repeatedly. The case prompted many people to express their anger at how Grace's life had been presented during the trial and how her death had been explained away by her killer. Many felt it was shameful and grotesque victim blaming. Rather than placing the blame squarely on the murderer himself, aspects of Grace's personal life were brought into question. Jesse's family branded him a pathetic fantasist. His stepbrother said Jesse lied over pointless things all the time and continued to lie until the point where he had no way out. Then he would break down, cry, and run away. After Jesse was found guilty of murdering Grace in the highly publicized trial, he faced 2 additional trials the following year. These were judge-alone trials, no jury was present. 2 women had gone to the police when they saw the blurred images of Jesse after he was arrested for Grace's murder. They knew instantly it was him, and they both had horrific stories to tell officers about Jesse. In the first of these 2 trials in October 2020, an ex-partner spoke of the physical, sexual, emotional, and financial abuse she had suffered while with him. Jesse would hold knives to her throat, choke her, force her to perform sex acts, and drain her bank account of $10,000. Jesse was found guilty of 8 charges and jailed for 7.5 years. In November 2020, he was put on trial again. This time it was for raping a young British tourist he had met on Tinder 8 months before he murdered Grace Millane. He forced himself on her and said that if she didn't comply, he would kill her and her family, and she knew he would do it. He was found guilty and given another 3.5 years in jail for this crime. This brought the total to an additional 11 years, which would run concurrently alongside the sentence he received for the murder of Grace. When Justice Jeffrey Venning found him guilty of rape, it prompted an aggressive outburst from Jesse. He shouted angrily at the judge, saying he was full of lies and had no reason to convict him. Tragically, in November 2020, Grace's father David Millane passed away after a battle with cancer. In December 2020, the name suppression concealing Jesse's identity finally lapsed when the Supreme Court denied his last-ditch appeal against his sentence in Grace's murder. It is alleged that Jesse is working on appeals for both of the sentences from the 2020 trials as well. To honor Grace's memory, her family and friends raised a record amount of money for the White Ribbon Campaign. The White Ribbon Campaign is a charity working to end male violence against women by engaging with men and boys to make a stand against violence and challenge harmful behaviors. Grace's family and friends raised over £11,000 in her name. The Love Grace campaign was also set up in Grace's honor. The campaign asks for donations of handbags filled with essential items to help provide support for women seeking refuge from harmful and abusive relationships. Grace Millane came to New Zealand seeking adventure and new experiences. Instead, she encountered a manipulative, violent man who took her life. But her memory lives on through the work being done to protect other women and prevent similar tragedies from happening to anyone else. Every crime leaves a trace, and we're here to follow them. Subscribe for more real, haunting stories you won't forget.